I don't even think he's necessarily a bad person in like an absolute good and evil sense. I just don't think that Spike cares about good or evil or morality or any of that shit.
Spike Spiegel, badass ex-Yakuza hitman, expert marksman, Jeet Kune Do master, one of the most badass, revered, beloved characters in really all of pop culture, the cowboy king of cool. Does he fuck? Welcome to episode 3 of DTF, where we take a look at pop culture's relationship to and depictions of romance and sexuality through close reading and analysis. My high school English teacher would be so proud. Mr. Tatum, if you're still out there and kicking, this one's for you. Now, if you're new to the series, today we're not going to be talking about Spike Spiegel and whether or not he has sex ever. Literally, like, one of the first scenes of the show is him having sex with Julia, kind of, in flashback, whatever. To define the terms a little bit, someone who fucks, like, has their shit together. They're caring and sensitive, and they're the sort of person you'd want to get busy with, not just because they're like a demon in the sheets, but because they're worth a damn as a human being. The inverse of this is the fuckboy. And the fuckboy is like a selfish lover. They're a narcissistic wank. They're all bark, no bite. The kind who like DMs you on Tinder and is like, hey, and then asks to see your tits. Today, we're going to look at whether Spike Spiegel fucks or whether he's a little fuckboy, all right? So if you've been living under a rock for like 25 years and you've never heard of it, Cowboy Bebop is an anime that was released in 1998 by now legendary director and creator Shinichiro Watanabe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It is widely regarded as one of the first and most profound masterpieces in anime. When you talk about like what are the defining anime series or movies, Bebop is up there with Akira and Berserk and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, everything Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli have ever done. Bebop is right up there with them. And there's a lot of reasons why it's so popular, both among sort of fans of anime and even people who are not huge fans of anime. Bebop blends a lot of different things together. It mashes up a lot of conventions of a lot of different things in very compelling and interesting ways. Bebop plays with classic conventions of film and television, while kind of pulling in this new medium and playing with the conventions and tropes of anime as well. So there's film noir and gangster movies and surrealism and psychedelia all blended together into this sort of dystopian cyberpunk future world. On top of that, it has, hands down, I think, and you can fight me on this in the comments, the best soundtrack in anime anywhere ever, maybe of any series of all time. I have spent the last like 20 years off and on just listening to the soundtrack, driving in the car, on road trips, sitting in my office because it is just so good. And Bebop's soundtrack also is a huge blend of folk and blues and techno music, and you name it, you'll find a little bit of it, often sort of mashed in with a different genre in an interesting and compelling way. And that's what Bebop does so well, is it takes these genres and reinvents them in interesting and compelling ways. Bebop is highly regarded for its character development on top of the rest of it. All of the main characters, the protagonists and the antagonists, have interesting sort of elements about them. They change over time and they have rich sort of histories that are often only hinted at, and we can kind of glean through some of the things that the characters say and do. And that's going to be really important when we talk about Spike Spiegel, but also the other characters in the show. The recollection of the past, right? And the incomplete recollection of that past and our inability to get a complete picture of the past is a huge motif in the show that we're going to come back to again and again. Bebop at release and since release has been an enormous influence on just tons and tons and tons of media that followed it. And not just Japanese media, not just anime, but Western media as well. Bebop was eventually a really big hit in America, partly because of the fantastic English dub. You can fight me on this. Most fans of anime who are purists are like, always, subtitles, always listen to it in the original. But the dub for Bebop is so good. It's so groundbreakingly phenomenal. And I think it made it really accessible for a lot of viewers who didn't want to watch a cartoon with Japanese vocals and subtitles and stuff. And so you have, especially on the back of Steve Bloom's just incredible performance as Spike Spiegel, one of, if not the best English dubs in anywhere in anime. I actually prefer it, and I'm a subtitle guy most of the time, but there is just something about the delivery of the entire vocal cast in the Bebop dub that is just really tremendous and makes the series a little more accessible for people who maybe don't like to watch a ton of things with subtitles. On top of that, American audiences had seen some Japanese-inspired animation or actual Japanese animation, but usually it was really, really bad. It was poorly animated, it was poorly dubbed, and it was seen as cheesy and hokey, right? We're looking at Pokemon and Speed Racer and nowadays One Piece. Like, One Piece's dub is just phenomenally bad, and that's a more contemporary thing, but there's thousands upon thousands of really shitty cheap dubs out there, and Bebop was really, for a lot of people, the first one that made them go, whoa, okay, this is really good, I can watch this. This is not some hokey kids show, this is something that's serious. And Bebop is a serious show, and it does have a lot of adult themes in it, and I think for a lot of people who maybe grew up watching, like I did, Fist of the North Star and Dragon Ball Z and things like that, you see something like Cowboy Bebop and it really elevates the form beyond kids' cartoon shows on Saturday morning. So all of this is part and parcel of why Cowboy Bebop is such an important thing, not just in anime and in Eastern animation, but in American and Western pop culture as well. And then there's the live action thing, which you should probably just skip. It's a hot piece of shit. As I'm recording this, they canceled it like a day or two ago. Never should have been made in the first place, but we are going to talk about it because we're going to have to. So Spike Spiegel is the main character of the show. And the major plot points that happen throughout the show are driven by him and his relationship to several other characters in the show. To give you a little bit of background on Spike Spiegel, Spike was born in a slum on Mars. He either didn't have parents or lost his parents really early in life and was taken in by the Red Dragon Syndicate, which is this sort of Yakuza-esque criminal cartel that spans the entire solar system. Spike becomes close friends with another syndicate agent named Vicious, and both were taken under the wing of a higher-up in the syndicate named Mao Yenrai. During his time with the syndicate, Spike becomes an exemplary thief, con artist, and hitman. He develops a mastery of Jeet Kune Do, a fighting style pioneered by Bruce Lee back in the day. He's an expert marksman. He has incredible skill and dexterity in hand-to-hand combat and tricks of sleight of hand and misdirection. As time goes on, Spike and Vicious become friends, partners even, and in flashbacks that Spike has throughout the series, we see them fighting back-to-back, smiling, clearly very close. You can't really talk about Spike without talking about Vicious, and not because Vicious is necessarily like a good, well-written character, but because their relationship informs our understanding of who Spike is, and more importantly, I think, who he used to be. Because Spike, deep down in his core, is like a good guy. He doesn't always do the right thing, but he has a heart and a soul, and Vicious does not. Vicious is... well, he's vicious. He is brutal. He's ruthless. He is entirely self-centered and overwhelmed by ambition. Vicious can and will do anything, step on anyone, outright kill any and everyone necessary to get his way. We see multiple times throughout the series that he kills with impunity and a complete absence of remorse or regret. He is a man of few words, and he has this really gravelly tone to his voice, and overall is just a brutal killing machine. And Vicious stands as this really dramatic foil to Spike, because if Spike had stayed in the Red Dragon Syndicate, he maybe could have turned out the same as Vicious. Maybe he would have grown to be as ruthless and brutal and violent and vicious a killer as Vicious is. But something turned things around for Spike. Something led him down a different path. Julia is a character that is referenced repeatedly throughout the series, usually in Spike's recollections or flashbacks of the past. At some point, Vicious meets Julia and begins a romantic relationship with her, but Julia slowly but surely seems to fall in love with Spike. The two begin an affair, and Spike ultimately decides that he's done with the Syndicate and convinces Julia to escape with him. Spike is just kind of tired of living this life, tired of being involved in the lifestyle of a gangster. And Julia is hesitant at first, but agrees to run away with Spike. That is until Vicious finds out about their plan. And he, at gunpoint, offers her a deal. Julia can meet up with Spike and kill him and be free of the Syndicate, or Vicious will just kill them both. And rather than doing either of those things, Juliet manages to escape on her own, but not before she stands up Spike when they're supposed to meet up. Julia, like Spike, winds up on the run from Vicious and the Syndicate, and that's sort of where we start the series off. And these three characters really are at the heart of what happens throughout Cowboy Bebop. All the major conflict and tension in Spike's narrative arc comes from this relationship between these three characters. Now, along the way, Vicious hatches this plot to take over the Red Dragon Syndicate, and it leads to all three of their paths finally, after several years, converging and sort of resolving this very complicated and extremely dangerous rivalry. When we meet Spike, he is a man of action. Often his adversaries want to tell him their sad, tragic history, and Spike is just kind of not into it at all. He's not interested in why you did the thing you did or how you became who you are. He's there to do his damn job, collect the bounty, and just kind of smirks at all of these sort of villainous monologues that happen throughout the series. This is another way that Bebop kind of plays with those tropes, right? You get the villain with their monologue about, whoa, I'm going to tell you why I did it. And Spike is like, oh my God, I don't care. The Teddy Bomber is a great example of this. Repeatedly, he tries to preach his manifesto and tell all of the people around why he's bombing all of these buildings. But Spike is so distracted with his rivalry with Andy that no one pays attention to the villain and their monologue. And we find out in the end, when he's made peace with it, why he was doing all of these things. But Spike never cares to find out. Which is not to say that Spike cannot be a talker. Yeah, he's stoic and guarded at times, but other times he very freely expresses his annoyance and frustration, especially when it comes to the big three: women, dogs, and children. All of whom, of course, wind up on the Bebop with him throughout the series. He seems to smile easily. He has a very laid-back, carefree, kind of put-together atmosphere around him. And certain characters throughout the series are drawn to this, like Roko, who sees him take down some guys on a ship, a transport ship, on a ship that, like an airplane, but it's a ship. It's an airplane that goes into space. It's like a spaceship airplane. It's a passenger ship, okay, is the point that I'm trying to make here. And Roko sees him as put together and super capable, self-actualized, without knowing, of course, that the opposite actually is true. Spike is constantly trying to reconcile his present experience with his past and the direction that he's going in life with the past that he's trying to escape but never really seems to be able to get away from. He mentions a couple of times throughout the series that he lost one of his eyes in an accident and as a result has a fake put in. And there's a lot of debate on the internet about whether it's his left eye or his right eye. It doesn't really matter. His prosthetic eye, though, is a slightly different color than his real eye, and he says that through his fake eye, he only sees the past, and through his real eye, he's living in the present. And so as a result, he's never really sure what's real and what's a dream. Some people have interpreted this as literally the eye is just like a glass eye, and so he's he's watching the past through the blank spot. No, it's stupid. It's a fucking metaphor. It is a metaphor for how he is simultaneously experiencing the present, but also experiencing the past, and how everything that he is living presently is being filtered through his experience of the past. Because of the circumstances of his leaving the Syndicate, where he fakes his own death, he has this sort of idea in his head that he really did die. And everything that he's living now is just a dream and none of it's real. At the end of the series, Faye is like, are you just leaving to die? And he's like, no, I'm going to see if I'm actually alive, because he's not entirely sure whether he's alive or not, whether everything that's happened has just been a figment of his imagination or not. And this what's real and what isn't motif is going to come up a lot throughout the series, both in the anime and the live action, although they're handled in very, very different ways between the two series. And through Spike, we have this recurring theme. Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? I'm caught in a landslide. So Spike is lighthearted, easygoing, comes across as really carefree, but he also has a bit of a short fuse. He gets frustrated extremely easily, especially when things don't go his way or when he's pushed a little too hard. He likes to be right, does not like to be wrong, and sometimes takes like a really grim attitude towards being called out for his mistakes. Other times he handles criticism or hardship by shrugging it off, and not in like a, hey, like live and learn sort of way, but like, if you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best kind of attitude. And that kind of rubs the people around him the wrong way, understandably, because they like him, but he can be a real asshole sometimes. We've all had that friend, right? We all know that person who you're like telling someone else about them and you're describing them out loud and you're kind of like, wow, this person's actually kind of awful, right? So you'd be like, yeah, my friend Spike, he doesn't really talk a lot and he's kind of self-centered. And when he does talk, he's kind of a dick. And he never really goes with the plan. He kind of goes off to the beat of his own drum, and he doesn't really give a shit about what you've got going on if he's got his own stuff going on. But I mean, he's really likable, and he's funny. He's funny, and he's got a really good heart. And you describe it like that, and you're like, wow, this guy sucks. Like, he's a real asshole. This guy, why do I hang out with this dude? He's super toxic. What the fuck? If you ever watched Cowboy Bebop and you were like, Spike is kind of a toxic dickhead, like I think he is. I think you're right. A lot of what he says and does is really dismissive of his crewmates who he has an affection for but doesn't really show. And Spike will always march to the beat of his own drum and does not like to concern himself with the affairs of others, especially if he's got his own shit to do or if he just doesn't feel like it. He's one of these people who's like, that's kind of a you problem, bro. So good luck with that. And you can be like, hey, you owe me a favor, or I helped you last time when you needed help, or why don't you please just help me? I'm your friend. And he's like, don't want to. Getting him to commit to something that he's not really interested in is really challenging. It's like pulling teeth. And in a lot of ways, Spike really is just this jackass of a character. And despite that, he is one of the most beloved characters in anime. You can even go into sort of non-anime centric spaces, and when Cowboy Bebop comes up, like one of the first things that's going to come up is, man, Spike Spiegel. He's so cool. He's so interesting. He's such a great character. And that's something worth thinking about, and we're going to come back to it as well. Spike is joined on his adventures throughout the solar system by several companions, and a few of them we'll discuss a little more than others because they correlate with Spike and his relationship to Julia and Vicious and his past and sex and love and romance and, the things that the show is supposed to be about. But I'm going to give you a little bit of backstory on each of them just in case you haven't seen the show, and if they do pop up, you'll know who the hell I'm talking about. First and probably foremost, we have Jet Black, and Jet is the owner of the Bebop, the ship where most of the show takes place. He is a stern, taciturn, gruff ex-cop, and he's the voice of reason and sanity on the ship most of the time. He often kind of takes the middle path in terms of like doing the smart, slow, steady thing rather than the fast, easy, reckless solution like Spike often takes. He's methodical, he's detail-oriented, and he works thoroughly through what they're doing and how they're going to do it. He's not quick to anger or like go off the cuff, and he kind of serves as the glue that holds the Bebop together. And with all of these big, interesting personalities around him, he's the character that's reasonable and grounded. He's the straight man, most, but not all of the time. Along the way, Jet and Spike pick up Faye Valentine. Faye is an expert con artist. She is smart, she is sexy, she is extremely capable, and she is a femme fatale. She uses her sex and cunning to manipulate and charm others. She's an incredible thief,
gambler, and a card cheat. And she's not quite good enough to fool Spike's eyes, but she's more than capable of holding her own in a chauvinist, patriarchal world. Faye uses the structures and mechanisms of all of the systems around her to her own benefit, taking advantage typically of men's weaknesses and presumptions. Faye was in cryo-freeze for most of her life and doesn't have any memory of her past and experience before being put on freeze. She's been out for many, 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 many decades, and a huge portion of her narrative is trying to figure out who she is and where she comes from and really where she belongs. As a result of this past and also her initial experiences coming out of cryo-freeze, she has huge trust issues and major abandonment issues as well. And those crop up repeatedly in her relationships and interactions with other characters on the show. And we talk about that, of course, a little bit later as well, because it's kind of important to Spike's arc, even if it doesn't directly overlap with what he does in the show. Rounding out the main cast are Ed and Ein. Ed is very young and a very talented hacker. She's portrayed androgynously. Even her own father can't remember if she's a girl or a boy. She's wacky, silly, quirky, weird, prone to hijinks and tomfoolery and shenanigans and all that sort of nonsense. Ed is always kind of curious and sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. She's an expert with computers, able at times to hack directly into the Bebop and remote control it. There aren't a ton of limitations to what she can do when it comes to computer systems. Her cohort, her little partner in crime, Ein, is a Welsh corgi. But not just any Welsh corgi. Ein is a data dog, possessed of human-level intelligence and able to interface and interact with computers and hack them himself. Ein's capabilities with computers actually surpass what Ed is able to do. Ein is this kind of R2-D2 type character who could just kind of plug into a computer and immediately know how to manipulate it and get certain things to happen. Their stories, if you can even really say Ein has a story, don't really fit into the analysis that we're doing, but they do pop up, so there they are. So all of these disparate and desperate characters find their way eventually onto the Bebop through various means and become partners. At the very least, partners in trying to capture bounty heads and keep their own heads afloat in a world where there is massive income and wealth inequality. There are massive criminal syndicates that are so powerful that the police have no hope of combating them. Police, in fact, are often shown to be on the payroll of these cartels and syndicates. Corruption is absolutely rampant. There is abject poverty on pretty much every planet they go to, as well as luxuriant wealth gated and hidden away. And the crew of the Bebop do not fit into the category of luxuriant or wealthy. They are flat broke all of the time and spend most of their time trying to carve out some kind of meager existence in this brutal, hostile world where danger lurks around every corner, waiting for them wherever they go. Even when they're just trying to relax and avoid danger, just have a nice day fishing and catch some sun. Okay, so that's the world of Bebop. And the question we're trying to ask is, who is Spike? And what is his relationship to sex and love? And what can we learn about our own relationship to these concepts through the way that Spike interacts with other characters? And to understand Spike and really understand Bebop, we have to take a look at all these different people and their relationship to the past. The past is a major theme of Cowboy Bebop. And it's an interesting motif because it's a show set in the future that's focused on the past while moving in a past that is our future. It's a mix of all of these classic media and art styles and new and fresh takes on a contemporary medium. So a lot of the music harkens back to classic jazz, bebop, swing, things like that, while taking a fresh look at those styles and blending and incorporating new styles in an interesting way. The whole crux of the show is taking a look at the past and how our past is intertwined with our future and how it can affect our future even though the past has already occurred. All of our characters in some way or another are trying to wrestle with the experiences that they've had in the past, how it impacts them in the present, and where it might lead them in the future. And when we start to kind of pull this apart, why are these characters so mired in the past? We really start to understand what Bebop is trying to do and what makes these characters so interesting and compelling. So let's dig into it. Spike, of course, has his relationship to the Red Dragon Syndicate, to Vicious, and to Julia. The Syndicate is this Yakuza mafia type organization. Once you're in, and you can never leave. And Spike's escape from the Syndicate hangs over him in every single thing that he does. It haunts him in every single day of his life in some way or another. He's always on the run, having faked his own death to escape. Additionally, this relationship he has with Vicious and Julia and the way that their attempt to escape together failed is a huge part of his character. So as he's navigating the solar system, he's kind of keeping an eye and an ear out for Julia. He's waiting for an opportunity for their paths to cross. But he doesn't actually know what happened to her. He knows they were supposed to meet up and escape from the Syndicate, but she stood him up, and that's all he really knows. She could still be in with the Syndicate. She could be on the run. She could be dead. He's not really sure. So he's just kind of drifting through life and waiting for the next thing to happen while this looming history hangs over him. And it affects a lot of the interactions he has with the people around him. Jet has his own history as a former cop. Jet has a mechanical arm because of an incident where he was tracking down this criminal who had information on a dirty cop. The hunt for this guy led him into a trap that caused him to get shot a bunch of times, and he loses his arm. This mechanical arm is a constant reminder of Jet's past. The betrayal, the disgrace, because his experience as a cop was based on his reputation. He was known to be a good cop. His nickname was the Black Dog, because once he sunk his teeth into something, he never let go. He fought for goodness in the law and was hurt for it by corruption. Additionally, he has this past relationship with a woman who left him, in his mind, inexplicably. And this thread gets tied up with him, but his past as a cop and his past with this woman sort of loom over him a lot as well and inform the decisions that he makes. He often relies on his police contacts to get him information, but there's a really, really healthy mistrust for the corruption and lawlessness even within the police force. It makes him sometimes cynical and bitter, and as much as he tries to keep this sort of taciturn air, he's always fiddling with these bonsai trees and kind of fucking it up because inside he's not at peace. He's not balanced. He hasn't resolved all of the things in his past, and he's certainly not as composed as he would like to appear as a result of it. Faye's history comes from her not knowing anything about her history. Spoiler for the end of the show, Faye as a child was on a spaceship when the astral gates, which are like a series of portals that allow people to go into hyperspace, the first astral gate to the moon exploded. And when it exploded, it destroyed a huge portion of the moon, causing all sorts of moon rocks to fall from the sky. Earth is basically uninhabitable and is constantly being pelted by meteors as a result of this accident. But she survived and was put into cryo freeze for a very, very long period of time until she could be restored to health and brought back to life. When she awoke, she had amnesia. She had no recollection of who she was, where she come from, anything like that. Additionally, she has no way of knowing where she comes from and whether she has a home or a past to return to. She has no recollection and no personal mementos that tie her to the life that she used to have. And she spends most of the show trying to kind of wrestle with who she is versus who she was. There are a lot of trust issues that come up as well because immediately after she's unfrozen, she takes on an enormous amount of debt as a result of the medical bills for being in a cryo freeze. And she gets swept up by this gentleman named Whitney who seems to be there to help her like transition and take care of this debt and do all of these things. But he actually turns out to be a con man who takes even further advantage of her, causes her to go into hundreds of billions of oolongs in debt. So her behavior becomes extremely self-motivated. She has this crippling debt looming over her all of the time that she has no hope that she can ever pay off. As a result of an accident she can't remember and a history she has no recollection of. So we start to see that her selfish, greedy behavior is motivated by her history, a history that she doesn't understand but is still forced to reconcile with. Ed even has her own sort of struggle with the past. We find out towards the end of the series that Ed is looking for her father, who she hasn't seen in years. He dropped her off at this orphanage on Earth and never came back for her. So she's trying to figure out as well, where is her family and where does she belong? Where does she fit in? And she has clearly a connection to the crew of the Bebop. She actually seeks them out, hoping to join up with them. And she wants to have this sense of family and belongingness, which, when she does eventually find her father, leads to her leaving the Bebop to be with her quote-unquote real family. So each of these characters has this relationship to their past that they're trying to reconcile, and they ultimately do in one form or another. Jet settles the score with his crooked ex-partner, who it turns out is the one who shot him and made him lose his arm and disgraced him on the police force and all that stuff. He's also able to trace down his ex who left him mysteriously and figure out why she left and accept that she's gone and it's time to move on and let go of that relationship. Jet is ultimately, I think, the one who's best able to reconcile his past and embrace the changes that have occurred and move on into his own future. Faye eventually does get her memory somewhat restored. She sees where she comes from, finds out everything sort of tying her to her old life is gone. She runs into one of her old high school classmates who's elderly and in a wheelchair because so much time has passed. She finds her childhood home and it's just ruins. There's a foundation and she sort of carves out a little bed space on the ground where her bedroom is in a very, very sort of touching and bittersweet moment. She realizes that there is really no past for her. There is only a future. And so she returns to the Bebop and to her friends that she's made, her comrades. And she's sad and torn up about it, but she comes out the other side sort of ready to face her future and discover herself through a new lens, through the lens of who she chooses to be, not who she used to be in the past. Ed finds her father, as I said before, and decides to leave the Bebop, and Ein tags along with her to go along with her father. Really, each of these characters would be better off letting go of the past, and each of them sort of in turn says that to other characters throughout the show. Stop worrying about the past. Stop dwelling on this. It's not good for you, even if all of them themselves are doing nothing but being mired in the past and dwelling on the past. Everyone except for Spike. Spike is never really able to let go of or reconcile his own past, even when he's given ample opportunities to do so. In the very, very, very end, when he meets up with Julia and finally reconciles everything with her, they have the opportunity to run away and live their new life and try to escape the danger and the drama from the syndicate as best as they can together, which is ostensibly what they both really wanted in the first place. The whole point of escaping the syndicate was to go and be together, whether that meant living on the run their entire lives or not. But Spike doesn't. He has Julia, he's standing right there with her and could just as easily go back to the Bebop and be like, hey, everyone, Julia, all right, Julia, everyone, do we want to leave Mars where everyone who wants to kill us is hanging out? Cool, okay, let's go to like Ganymede or something and get a beer. But he doesn't. He has this vendetta with Vicious that he has to reconcile as well. The person who, for the past several years, has been keeping him from his love, that missing piece in his life, is now about to become the head of the Red Dragon Syndicate. Through a series of kind of convoluted, like, coups that fail but don't actually fail. There's all this other stuff going on. And Spike's like, nope, can't leave. Gotta go take care of Vicious. And Julia's like, we could just dip. We could just leave. We don't have to do this. And Spike is not hearing any of it. He cannot let go. He can't take the money and run, you know? This ultimately leads to Julia's death and Vicious's death and Spike's death, ? I personally believe that he dies at the end. I think it's the only real way to end the show, because if Spike lives, then like, what happens, right? Like, let's just talk about this for a second. If Spike survives, then what does he get up to after that? Is he like, okay, cool, I was taking a little snooze, lost a lot of blood, but I'm better now. How are you guys doing? Oh, you want me to be the leader of the syndicate, but I'm not really about that life. Then what happens? Or maybe he does become the leader of the syndicate and Spike's story is about going right back to the syndicate, going back to being this heartless gangster, going back to a life of crime. That doesn't really work either. I think we all sort of love the idea that Spike is, able to go back to Jet and Faye and be like, hey guys, it's all over. Ready to be your friends now, and we can have fun space hijinks and a good time until like we're picked off one by one by a bounty head that gets a lucky shot off. And there's no story. There's no compelling anything that happens after Spike resolves his past. And so I think the implication and the most sensible one narratively is that he dies in the end. Spike is the only one who can kill Vicious. Vicious is the only one who can kill Spike. And we see in the end that that's basically what happens. They trade, right? Like it's a Halo game. Bow. Anyway, why is Spike so caught up in the past? Why can't he let it go? This accident that comes up over and over again that leads him losing his eye. He talks about seeing his past constantly, how he's living in a dream, how he doesn't know if he's alive or dead, but he definitely knows he died at least one time already. This kind of makes him cool, right? Like cool and calm and collected in the face of death because he's like already died before and it wasn't really that big of a deal. So he has this like interesting sensibility because he's not easily flustered because his priorities don't really line up with like yours or mine in terms of self-preservation. But at the same time, he can't let go of his attachments both in the present and in the past. His escape that started years ago is not complete without Julia. And he tells Jet that like a piece of him is missing his entire life, this piece of him, and he needs her to feel complete and whole. And so he's basically just meandering through life in this like dreamlike state. And in his mind, life cannot go on, cannot be meaningful, cannot be compelling and fulfilling and worth living without her in it. And I think if Spike did survive in the end, he'd be upset. Like, I killed Vicious, but Julia is dead. I have nothing left to live for. My story is over. Why am I still here? And I think if they released some sequel somehow and Spike were like, wow, that was a close one. And Jet was like, oh, Spike, you're always getting into trouble, but I'm glad you're okay, buddy. You'd be like, well, this is stupid, right? Like, I think it would really point out for like all the believers out there that, you know, Spike made it. Like, that's farcical. That's ridiculous. Now, this is the first character that we've covered in the series who's clearly not like asexual in some way. We talked about Luke Skywalker and said like, I think he's aromantic, asexual. And we talked about Lieutenant Commander Data, who is not capable of romantic feelings or sexual attraction. And Spike is not that. Spike does have sex with Julia. He is clearly in love with Julia and is infatuated and obsessed with her in a way that shows us like, yeah, he is a dude who has the sex. But we're not really here to talk about whether Spike has sex with people. We're trying to talk about whether Spike fucks. And Spike is charismatic and a charmer. He is flirtatious with Katarina in the very first episode. And he's flirty with Elektra in Knocking on Heaven's Door, the Cowboy Bebop movie, which somehow, if you haven't seen that, go and watch it. It's really good. It's got great new music, phenomenal animation, all that sort of stuff. Magnifique. But when we're talking about sex and sexuality and romance and these characters, we want to know, is this person a good partner? Would they be a good lover? Are they someone you'd want to spend time around? Or are they just a feckless little weak fuckboy? Spike's infatuation supersedes pretty much every other motivation that he has. He sees Julia as a piece of him that is missing, that makes him incomplete when she's not around. And you might go, wow, that's so romantic, right? This guy fucks. But we see that and he says that, but it's not really true, is it? Because when push comes to shove, when Spike has the opportunity to run away with Julia or confront Vicious, he confronts Vicious and it gets Julia killed. And she's like, please don't do this. And he's like, sorry, bro, gotta do it. Vicious has to be stopped. And it has to be me. For some reason, like, who stops him? I don't think it's too much of a stretch to imagine that Spike is real good at the sex, right? Like, he probably is good at sex, but Spike doesn't fuck. This dude just does not fuck. He's a complete asshole. He is a fuckboy. He is primarily guided by his own impulses, his own motivations, regardless of the consequences that those impulses and motivations might have on the people around him. Even the person that he says completes him, his other half, the most important person in the universe to him. he just disregards, and she dies for it. She dies because of his need to go and confront his rival, a dude who fucks ain't about that life. Now we see over and over and over again that Spike's recklessness, his impulsivity, his desire to do things the Spike way and no other, to never follow a plan, to never fall in line with what might be sensible and prudent, fucks him over and other people on the ship over and over and over again. Very early on, we see Spike's recklessness leads to property destruction that gets taken out of their bounties when they capture someone. The damage that they do to the environment around them gets deducted from their paycheck. And so a bounty that should feed them and fuel them and allow them to live comfortably for a little while is completely undone by Spike's recklessness and impulsivity. And Spike is just kind of like, hey man, that's just kind of the way things be sometimes. Not a big deal. And he's like, are you fucking kidding me? Your dipshittery fucking killed our payout. What the fuck is wrong with you? Why can't you just go along with the plan every once in a while? And Spike's relationship in past with the Red Dragon Syndicate and is constantly there and causes harm and injury to the Bebop and the other crew around him all the time. In the end, all of this stuff is kind of coming to a head, and the coup happens and Jet gets shot in the fucking leg and their veterinarian friend has to dig bullets out of him. The Bebop gets shot to shit over and over and over again after the Syndicate comes after them. All of this stuff is going on and people are constantly being brought into this dangerous black hole that is Spike's past. When other people have their shit going on, Spike is like, deal with it, bro. That's a you problem. Hi. So here I am editing this and I had a thought occur to me that I'm going to shoehorn on into here. So you might say, okay, earlier you said Spike is a good guy, but now you're saying he's not. And there's a couple of times where he does do things that are kind of selfless. He goes after Katerina and Asimov and tries to prevent them from getting killed. He saves Ein from falling to his death. And with Rocco, he looks after him and helps him rather than turning him in after he meets his sister and all of these sorts of things. And other than Ein, which I think is just a save the dog, right? You can't just let a dog die sort of situation, whether that's for TV or that's just Spike being a human being. The other two I think are really interesting because I still think that Spike's behavior with them is self-motivated. He sees something of himself in Asimov and Katerina in his relationship and sort of attempt to escape with Julia. And certainly in Rocco, he sees somebody getting mixed up in something young and trying to take care of people that he cares about. And I think Spike sees the potential for Rocco to wind up like Spike and wants to save him from that. But I think it's still very much just him sort of selfishly acting out or projecting onto these people his own issues and trying to reconcile his past through other people in the present. And of course, Katerina and Rocco both get killed rather than being able to escape. I think that looking at these two examples is no, Spike actually is selfless and cares about other people doesn't really capture the full extent of it. And so I think you have to sort of deliberately misinterpret what's going on in those episodes if you choose to see Spike as well, he's a good guy because of these things. No, he's sort of trying to process through his own trauma through these things. And I don't really think that it means that he's selfless. Okay, anyway, let's get back to it. If Spike were your roommate, you would be desperate to get out of that situation. If you had a dude like Spike hanging around, always eating your food, borrowing your car and never putting gas in it, and you're hey, why didn't you gas up the car? And they're well, you should have filled it up before you left if you wanted it to have more gas in it. You would not put up with someone like this in your life. But because you, as a viewer, are on the outside looking in, you get to sort of cherry pick all the things that are cool and relatable or you would like to relate to in this character and sort of gloss over or laugh off all of the misfortune that he causes the people around him. Because it's not really happening to you. It's happening to other people. And when we look at media through like an empathetic lens, when we look at characters through this empathetic perspective, we can put ourselves not just into the main character's shoes, where we can go, wow, Spike, had this whole hard life and he's chasing after this woman and all that stuff. But like, look at the way he actually treats other people around him and how they would feel. A great example of this in more contemporary media is Walter White from Breaking Bad. We initially relate to and identify with him and think he's kind of cool. And then over time, we start to see the way that Walt becomes power hungry and manipulative and self-centered. And it takes season after season of this for him to finally admit, like, it's not really about the money. It never has been. It's about power and prestige and recognition and respect that I don't get in other places in my life, but that I desperately crave. And it all boils down to Walt's past in this company he co-founded but decided to leave. His friend and co-founder who became massively successful and wealthy as a result of this company, while Walt hit financial hardship and became a high school science teacher with none of the acclaim, none of the accolades. And we stop seeing Walt as cool and sympathetic, and we start to see his behavior has this toxic and negative effect on all the people around him, especially Jesse Pinkman. But with Spike, we don't do that because unlike Walter White, Spike isn't evil. He's self-absorbed. He's self-motivated in a way that isn't as obvious or as obviously destructive. And Walt's relationship with Jesse Pinkman is very clearly dangerous and toxic. But that doesn't make it any less abusive or toxic when Spike does it. Spike doesn't fuck. He's a fuckboy through and through. Okay, video over, right? Hold on. You can see that we still got plenty left to talk about because this is the first character we've talked about on the show who I think unequivocally doesn't fuck. And I want to talk about that and whether it's a bad thing or not. The premise of the series kind of assumes that fucking is good and not being someone who fucks is bad. Does this person fuck? Do they get shit done? I think in real life, right? That's great. Like you want to be someone who fucks. But in media, that's not necessarily true. We can have great and interesting and compelling characters who don't fuck. And I think Spike is one of them. Spike is an interesting character who clearly is a piece of shit and never learns to put his shit aside and like take care of others. He's single-minded in all of his pursuits. He doesn't care if his actions affect other people. His own shit always takes priority, especially when it comes to Julia, and even more so when it comes to Vicious. And this struggle that he has with his past and Julia and Vicious and his motivations and his decisions, his relationships, all of this stuff is what makes him so interesting. Yeah, he's this badass martial arts fighter dude, and he sucks, right? He carries all the trappings of being the good guy, but he's not. He's anti-heroic at best, but he causes misery to all of the people around him all the time. And I wouldn't call him the villain of the show, but he's not like the bounty hunter with a heart of gold who always gets the job done, right? Who always does the right thing. And that's part of what makes him so compelling and attractive to people. Spike does march to the beat of his own drum. He does what he wants to do, how he wants to do it. And I think a lot of people envy that, the ability to navigate life in that way, because it's challenging to live in the real world. You do have to account for what's going on around you in your day-to-day life, your coworkers, your boss, your partners, your family, whoever it is. You have friends and just random people on the street and the person who makes your coffee in the morning. Like, you have to be considerate of the people around you, even if you don't necessarily like them or want to care about them. You still have to learn to navigate the world with compassion, or at the very least, sort of like a basic tolerance of other human beings and their autonomy. But we kind of want to be able to do our own thing. We don't always want to have these interactions. We don't always have interest in having that small talk with the coworker or whatever it is. Keeping the peace in the world around us sucks sometimes. And you look at a character like Spike and he doesn't. So what's the difference between us and Spike? Why does Spike get to do this and we don't? Well, Spike lives in a world where nobody gives a shit. Everyone is dangerous. Death lurks around every corner. And so, like, what's the point of fucking social niceties and all that bullshit? Like, all that stuff goes right out the window the second you don't know if you're going to live or die on a daily basis. And that might be coming for us sooner or later if things keep going the way that they're going. But that ability to say whatever you want, do whatever you want, and damn the consequences, and live your life however you want to. Say whatever just springs into your mind, to just not give a shit about niceties is appealing to a lot of people because it feels sexy and confident and self-assured. But that misses the part where it can cause harm to other people. And part of the reason we do keep social niceties and engage in small talk and try to keep the peace is because most people don't actually want to hurt the people around them. And Spike is able to do that and harm all of these people and be forgiven for it. And I think if people really called him out on his shit on the show, like really held him accountable and saying like, no, fuck you, get the fuck out of here, people would be a little quicker to say like, yeah, that guy's a real asshole. But because he's constantly being forgiven by Faye and Jet and even Julia in the end, there's no accountability for him. And it does not help that he is extremely competent and powerful. There's no doubt that Spike could easily like beat up or kill like anyone else on the ship or ever around him if he really needed to. How do you hold someone accountable who you don't have any leverage over? And even when Jet, especially tries to call him out on his shit or hold him accountable, he just brushes it off. Nothing sticks to him. And you don't want those people around you. Look at our former president and how frustrating it is that no matter how many awful and atrocious and scandalous things he said or did, nothing ever seemed to stick. No accountability has ever seemed to happen for him. No one is able to hold him accountable for his shitty behavior because he's not able to feel the feelings necessary to be held accountable. He's never willing or able to admit a mistake, apologize, and say, I fucked up. That's my bad. I'm sorry I hurt you. It won't happen again. And interacting with people like that is incredibly frustrating because more often than not, they do succeed when they clearly shouldn't and don't deserve to get away with so much that other people wouldn't be able to do because there is leverage, accountability, and it sticks, and that matters. There's a conscience in their brain that says, yeah, I fucked up. I should make amends. How do you get someone who can't feel those feelings to feel those feelings? I don't think Spike is a bad character. I don't even think he's necessarily a bad person in like an absolute good and evil sense. I just don't think that Spike cares about good or evil or morality or any of that shit. I think Spike cares about what he cares about and does what he wants to do. And Spike lives in a world where that's accepted or at the very least tolerated. And we're complicit in that. We celebrate this character. We say, wow, this dude's awesome, but he's not. That doesn't make him less interesting or compelling as a character, but it is worth noting, I think, that one of the most celebrated anime protagonists of all time is a selfish, self-absorbed fuckboy in the anime. Okay, let's talk about the live action series, I guess. Okay, so it sucks. It's bad. It's really, 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 really bad. And I'm not one of these like nostalgic fuckwads who's like, you're ruining my childhood or whatever. It's not bad because it changes things about Bebop. it's bad because it's just bad. It's just genuinely not good. And that does kind of sully my ability to watch and appreciate the anime. Like, I watched the live action adaptation before deciding I was going to do this episode on Spike. So I watched the entire thing, and honestly, like, I was on board with it. I described it to my partner Star as like a remix, right? It's got a lot of the same notes and some of the same motifs, but they're arranged a little bit differently, and not everything is what you expect it to be and where you expect it to be. And it's like, that's kind of cool, right? Like, the show is like 25 years old, and a shot-for-shot remake, you know, like, that could be cool sometimes, but it depends on the medium, right? Sin City comic book adaptations really benefit from like pulling panels from the comic book. Anime is a dynamic medium. It's not static like a comic book. It's film, it's television. So adapting a dynamic thing into a different type of dynamic thing in a one-to-one remake just doesn't make a lot of sense. So, okay, the original is good in its own right, and there's no need to tell the same stories with live action instead of animation. So, got it. All right, I'm on board. Remix Cowboy Bebop. So, I watched it, and I gave it the benefit of the doubt, despite some of the really significant changes they made. And I was appreciating it until like the last 30 minutes or so of the final episode. And then I was like, nope, I cannot do this any longer. I hate it. It's atrocious. And then I go back and I'm watching Cowboy Bebop for like the 15th fucking time to make this episode. And I'm like, oh man, how is Netflix going to fuck this episode up? Oh, how is Netflix going to ruin this story arc? Oh, what is Netflix going to do to ruin this character? And I honestly, like, now that I'm sitting down and recording this, I'm extremely grateful that they canceled the series, because I don't have to worry about that shit anymore. I could just go and watch the original. So it all just distracted from my ability to appreciate the original show, because I just sort of kept foreseeing how bastardized and sullied it would be in the future. And that will fade with time. Everything that has been subjected to this kind of like lackluster remake, eventually, right, like the bitterness in your mouth begins to fade. You can, in fact, still go back and read the Game of Thrones books, even though the TV show turned into a complete clusterfuck, right? Like, you can appreciate the original without the effect of the adaptation fucking it up for you. So, all right, let's just talk about the thing, even though it sucks. And now, I originally wrote, like, just know that they're going to do this, but now let's all just be grateful, okay? Everything they did with, like, Ein's Eyes and Radical Ed and Vicious and Julia, they're not going to ruin all of it. They're not going to ruin Cowboy Andy. They're not going to ruin Rocco. They're not going to fuck it all up. And even, okay, the Jet stuff was actually pretty good. Can we all just agree that the Jet episode was pretty decent? So anyway, live action Spike Spiegel is not Spike Spiegel at all. It is a completely different character. And so for the purposes of this, we're going to differentiate the two characters. There's real Spike, and then there's fake Spike, okay? So while I was putting all of this together, my partner sort of repeatedly mentioned that Twitter discourse has described the live action remake as like a bad cosplay, and I see it as sort of a fanfic. I agree that the characters are dressed like the characters they're supposed to be, but they don't really act in any way like them. They don't talk like them. They don't interact with or have relationships with one another or their past like them. So it's not Cowboy Bebop, and yet it is, right? They're clearly pulling from the mythos. You know, if you were unsure how much Watanabe was consulted on this, he wasn't sure how much he was going to be consulted. And it seems like they talked to him to say they talked to him. They probably called him up and were like, hey, does Spike die at the end? And he's like, it's up to you. And they're like, cool. Okay, thank you for the consultation. We're going to put your fucking name on every episode. It's PR, clearly. Because if Watanabe had been consulted like really at all on this show, these characters would carry the spirit and meaning and purpose of their originals much, much, much more closely. My biggest criticism and takeaway from the live action series is that they took this masterpiece, right? This self-contained 26 episodes of really, really, really tight narrative and storytelling, and they turned it into a regular old-ass TV show. And TV shows have to have likable characters, and the characters have to be friends and buddies, and there has to be tension. But, they're clearly went into this with the intention of making multiple seasons. It's 6 seasons in a movie, right? Rather than tell the story and when it's done, Netflix tried to turn it into this multi-series cash cow. They're trying to make long-form Cowboy Bebop, and that clearly informs a lot of the decisions that they made to make the show and the characters more accessible, more TV-friendly, and definitely more marketable than what occurs in the original show. That leads to a whole bunch of memberberry shit, okay? Remember this song? Remember this character? Remember Bye Space Cowboy? Remember you're gonna carry that weight? Hey, remember the movie? Oh, you didn't watch the movie? Okay, we made the whole intro of the show basically the intro to the movie. So now you don't even have to watch the movie. You could just watch our TV show. Remember Gren? Well, we made him into someone who's not Gren at all. Remember Annie? Remember Annie, the one-off character who talks to Spike about his backstory and then fucking dies? Well, now she's a badass information broker. Fucking kill me. Remember this? Remember that? Anyway, fake Spike learns fake Julia is still out there. And our expectations are subverted because Julia, in the end, calls him out for being a fuckboy, because in the live action show, a lot of the same backstory stuff exists, and it's actually fleshed out a lot more than it is in the original. Fake Spike, fake Vicious, still friends, partners, hitmen, and they fall in love with this beautiful woman. Vicious woos and courts her, but Spike has an affair with her. They plan to leave the syndicate, the whole kit and caboodle. In the original, Vicious finds out Julia was going to run away with Spike and says, nope, you're not going to do that. In fact, you're going to meet up with Spike and you're going to kill him. And if you don't do that, I'm going to kill you both. And Julia's like, I'm never going to kill Spike. I love him. And so she escapes and goes on the run. In fake Cowboy Bebop, Vicious finds out Spike and Julia have been messing around with one another and just decides he's going to kill them both. And when Spike goes to meet up with Julia, Vicious shows up and is like, she's not coming. She chose me over you. Sucks, bro. And then murders him. And later, when Spike and Julia run into each other in the final episode of Fake Bebop, she's like, bro, hello? Why didn't you come and get me? And he's like, what do you mean? And Vicious is like, ha ha ha, I told him you chose me. And he's like, yeah, he told me you chose him. And she's like, you believed him? You believed him? Wow. Okay, you suck. The second Spike finds Julia, he's chasing after her. He's like, yes, okay, you're alive. Great. Let's run away together. And it's a complete inversion of real Bebop. Look, we got Vicious by the fucking balls. We can literally just murder Vicious and leave, and no one will ever come after us again. And it'll be fine. And she's like, nope, I got my own shit going on. I'm gonna run the syndicate now because I'm the worst. Now, because they took this masterpiece anime and turned it into a TV show, Julia then tries to kill Spike. And rather than just killing her shitty, abusive, whining, sniveling fucking husband, she keeps him locked in a boiler room or some shit so that she can go and run the syndicate. But I don't know, torture him or grill him for information or whatever. It's really so he can escape later and continue being a character on the show. And everyone so far is like, I hate Vicious and want to kill him and don't want to have to deal with them anymore. And the second they're like, we could just kill Vicious, they don't. The show's fucking stupid. Okay, let's keep going. Let's talk about fake Vicious for a minute, okay? Real Vicious is vicious. He's dark and mean and single-minded in his ambitions. He is cunning and cruel and cutthroat, and he doesn't talk, and he's an awesome villain. He's not like, oh, Vicious is so relatable and sympathetic like Thanos, right? And he's not this over-the-top and interesting Loki villain. He's this, emo anime villain with a sword who talks like this. He never blinks. He's doing some fucking stone cold shit all the time. And that's what Vicious is there to do. He is there to be a stone cold badass with a sword. And it works. He is scary. He is terrifying. everyone around him is constantly worried that they're going to be murdered by him, even if they didn't do anything wrong, because they've seen Vicious murder people for no reason. He's scary. Even outside of the syndicate, people know who the fuck he is. He is a dangerous, scary, killing machine. Even the leaders of the syndicate, these 3 old dudes named the Van, refer to him as a snake, coiled, waiting to strike. Fake Vicious is a whining, minging, petty, little sniveling. Yep. Fake Vicious is jealous of his boyhood friend Fearless, who is Spike, because apparently Vicious is like a nickname and not a real name. And so they gave Spike a nickname and not a real name, and then he takes on Spike as a new name when he leaves the syndicate. Spike is genuinely fearless, right? He is a badass, and Vicious isn't actually vicious. So why did he get the nickname It's so stupid. Anyway, he's super jealous of Spike and is impotent and completely incapable of doing literally anything right on his own. And he's constantly sort of caught off guard by decisions that other characters make. And he's angry and reckless and hot-headed and abusive and shitty and just bad. He's just dumb and bad, and everyone hates him. And everyone looks at Spike and goes, wow, like, you're the real deal, bro. You're professional and smart and personable and put together, and everyone knows Spike really should be the one running this. But Vicious's father is this dude named Caliban, who's a member of the Van, who runs the syndicate, and he has to now be groomed for leadership because that's how it works or whatever, even though he really sucks and is bad at being a syndicate person. But it's just stupid. It's just really stupid. So Fake Vicious is bad at lying. He's bad at manipulating and only accomplishes anything because fake Julia is constantly bailing his stupid ass out of every bind that his dipshittery gets him into. And despite this, Vicious is a complete asshole to Julia. When you watch the show, you're like, yeah, no shit she hooks up with Spike. Spike is awesome and funny and willing to like go out and dance and have a nice time and cheer her up on a bad day. Fake Spike fucks. Like, Fake Spike is an absolute catch compared to Vicious for sure. It's a really important piece of why Fake Bebop doesn't work. Fake Spike fucks. Real Spike doesn't. Real Spike is selfish and self-absorbed and a dickhead. And this Fake Spike has to be sort of relatable and accessible. And to be the protagonist and the hero of a show like this, like, he's got to be thoughtful and sensitive and care about the people around him and help his friends and do nice things for them and put himself in harm's way every once in a while so that people can succeed, you know, so that his friends can succeed. Like, Fake Spike fucks. And that's part of the reason why they're not the same character. And that's part of the reason why that character sucks. Part of what makes Cowboy Bebop is Spike being Spike. Singularly minded, self-absorbed, unwilling to let go of his past, and reckless in his ambitions and motivations. And when you change that, you change the character. And when you change the character, you're just not watching Cowboy Bebop anymore. But it doesn't end with them. No. Spike and Vicious are not the only fake characters in the show. Other than Jet, I'd say just about every character in the show is not actually the character. They're just fake facsimiles, especially Julia. Fake Julia is a real fucking piece of work, okay? Real Julia is she's some girl, right? She sings songs and hangs out with the boys, and she gets swept up in the syndicate, and she gets a little bit savvy, and she gets with Vicious, gets with Spike, but she's not like a hardened badass until she's like in the world for a while, and then goes on the run to escape Vicious and the syndicate. And Fake Julia kind of follows the same formula, right? She's not stupid. She's not unsophisticated. She basically coaches Vicious on how not to be a fuck up and keeps bailing him out of like really dumb shit situations. Like, she's clearly got more diplomacy and savvy and political capability than Vicious will ever have. even after she's basically imprisoned by him and forced to do all of his shitty bidding. But her turn as a villain is just so bad and wrong and stupid and atrocious and dumb. So, okay, fake Julia calls Spike out for being a fuckboy, but fake Spike isn't a fuckboy. And that's like the weird sort of problem with her turn. Like, if in real Bebop, she'd been like, you suck. You're selfish and self-absorbed and stupid and could have been trying harder to find me. And you've just been palling around with your dudes being a bounty hunter. Like, what the fuck? Like, that would have made a certain amount of sense, right? But when Spike finds Julia in fake Bebop, he's like, cool, let's go. Let's get the fuck out of here, right? Team Spike, Team Julia, that's awesome. Let's kill Vicious. Let's go. And she's like, no, you're a total fuckboy. Even after Vicious is like, no, hey, it's my fault. He's not a fuckboy, whatever. She's like, yeah, I don't give a shit. I want to run the show, so fuck you. In fake Bebop, Spike is like quippy and funny and does things for his friends. And they sometimes try to shoehorn in this like, will he do the right thing? Like, okay, we'll do the right thing. Go after the bounty. And they're like, no, stop the thing from turning everyone into trees. And he's like, okay, I guess we'll stop the thing from turning everyone into trees. Like sometimes they try to put this like selfish angle on him, but it never really sticks and it never really feels right because in all of these other circumstances, we see Spike being like super pally. There's this moment where Faye is like, who's the cosmonaut? And it's clearly this inside joke between him and Jet. And Spike's like, welcome to the Bebop. And he's got this like warm look on his face. Like, yeah, new friend, welcome to the Bebop. And you're like, what the fuck is this? This is not Spike. Spike does not want Faye on the ship. Spike does not want her there. He finds her to be an inconvenience. And they try to like push that into it too, right? Like, can I just kill her just a little bit? Can I just kill her a little bit? But then they fucking force these like bonding moments, like the shower bath shower thing that they kind of obviously hoped would like catch on and be like a pop culture touchstone. Oh, it's life changing. And Spike is like, yeah, it's life changing. Let's talk about loofahs. Like in real Bebop, I could actually see that exchange occurring. I could see Faye being like, you know, you boys just don't know how to treat yourself. And Spike being like, yeah, whatever, quit using up all the hot water. But then at the end of the episode, right, he'd like give it a shot and be like, actually is pretty rad. But he'd never like tell her that he agreed with her because that's not how he roll. And it would be so much more like effective and funny and right and real and interesting for Spike as a character to like give it a shot in secret and never let on that he like gave her the time of day. And all of the tension, all of the frustration between these characters is manufactured by like super sitcom-y tropes. Like everyone's got a secret and what's going to happen when it gets revealed. In real Bebop, Jet knows Spike used to be in the syndicate. It's a known thing. And he's like, man, your past with these dudes is really fucking you. Why don't you stop fucking with it? And Spike's like, no, I gotta. But in the fake Bebop, they have to make it this source of tension, right? All of these secrets. In the last episode of the live action remake, Jet is just so glad that Spike is alive after his fight with Pierre LaFaux. And there will be a little Patreon only video with my numerous and extensive rants and angry things about the live action adaptation. So you can go to patreon.com/rain101 to check that out if you're interested. But anyway, that episode sucks. Point is, Jet comes and finds out Spike's alive and gives him a big old bear hug, and he lets his feelings for Spike be known just in time to find out this dark secret that ruins everything, because they do this whole thing where Jet has a kid and the kid gets kidnapped, and most of the time the formula with their relationship is Jet being like, Spike, you fucked up, and Spike being like, yeah, but remember that funny thing? And Jet being like, yeah, that funny thing was funny, wasn't it? And Spike being like, ha ha ha, we're such good friends. And Jet being like, everything's forgiven, buddy. And then Spike goes, there's something I need to tell you. And Jet's like, what is it? And Spike's like, I'm hungry. Ha 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 ha. What the fuck? And then fake Faye finds her tape, right? The tape from the anime in this like identikit. She finds it in like episode 8, and we don't know fuck all about her yet. she doesn't have these big trust and abandonment issues yet. They changed Whitney into her mom and made it like mommy issues and showed her like doing a little bit of con man shit, and that was cool. But the Frozen Unfrozen backstory doesn't have the same weight, and the crushing medical debt isn't there, and her identity crisis and all of these issues just don't happen. In the anime, Faye keeps showing up and kind of conning them out of their shit. She's constantly desperate, and she's constantly on the run, and she's constantly sort of caught up in like just trying to like make ends meet. And in the live action adaptation, it's all played for laughs. There's no desperation in it. It's like, got you back, guys, because they're the ones who hate her and she's just looking for friends. It's so fake and wrong. And so when her past and her history starts to get reconciled, it just doesn't feel as earned. We learn more about Faye's backstory and history late into the Bebop anime. And so many hoops have to get jumped through for them to be able to even watch this tape, right? Once this Betamax tape is found, they have to go and find someone who knows what the fuck it is. Then they have to find a way to play it. Then they have to go to old Earth and like spelunk into the ruins of like a shopping mall to find a functioning Betamax player, and then figure out how to hook it up to the Bebop because it's ancient technology, so that they can play this tape. And you see like how far they're willing to go to help their partner, even if they give her a hard time about it, even if their interactions have this tension to them. You see the love between these characters in the slow burn buildup and reveal of Faye's history. And here they're just like, oh, here's your tape with your whole history on it. Bye. Gonna go fuck your stepdad now. Like, the fuck? The original series is 26 22-minute episodes, and Fake Bebop is 10 45-minute episodes. So despite 10 episodes covering like 2/3 of the watch time of the original series, there's almost no time for any of these plots to really develop, because the entire series is, here's Spike's backstory. The whole conceit of real Bebop is kind of accepting your past and embracing your future. And Spike's entire conceit is his refusal to do so, which gets him actually dead. Jet gets over his ex and his past as a cop and all that shit. Ed finds her father, finds her place with her family. Faye realizes her past is just gone, and her new friends on the Bebop are worth a damn, and that's where her future lies. Spike has the chance to embrace a new future, but has to go and confront his past. That's what the show is about. And Fake Bebop is a buddy cop show about these three wacky companions chasing bounties and making quips and shit. Okay, whatever. This is about Spike. Let's get back to Spike again. Patreon.com/Rain101. Get all my bitching and gripes over there. So, Fake Spike fucks. When push comes to shove, he does the right thing for the right reasons. He finds his girl and is like, fuck it, let's dip. Let's go and live that life. He's savvy and smart, but clearly cares about his companions. And that's not bad. One of my favorite moments in the remake, Jet has to go and like holographically appear at his daughter's recital. And Spike is like, bro, for real? Like, we're on a mission. And Jet is like, she's got the lead. And Spike's like, all right, yeah, okay, go watch your recital. And then like a bunch of assassins come, and Spike has this like whole fight sequence in the background, and there's all sorts of shit going on while, you know, Jet is watching the recital and cheering on his daughter and stuff. And it's sweet, and it's heartwarming, and it's believable, and it's not Spike at all, because real Spike would never do that shit. He would be like, that is a you problem. Why did you schedule a mission and an assassination on the same day as your daughter's recital? Why are you being like this? Real Spike goes back to bed. Real Spike is like, Faye, sorry about this weird shit with your mom. Sucks to suck. I'm going to go eat some noodles, watch some TV. Let me know when that's over with so we can get back to whatever I feel like doing. Neither character is a bad character, but they are not the same character. And making Spike not a fuckboy kind of ruins him. Part of what makes him interesting is he's like this cool guy that doesn't afraid of anything. But when push comes to shove, he's this wanky little twat and his priorities are all fucked up, and that's why he do. Real Spike is not a good person, but he is interesting and compelling, and fake Spike is likable and decent, and it makes him this like Ryan Reynolds character. And honestly, like, who gives a fuck, dude? No shade on Ryan Reynolds. I love Ryan Reynolds, but Deadpool fucking ruined everything, because now every character who's like a cool guy has to have almost this like fourth wall breaking level of self-awareness, has to hang a lantern on every trope or weird thing or make a quip at an inappropriate time because funny, haha, Ryan Reynolds, you gotta be funny. And it works for Ryan Reynolds, but not every character needs to be that. It's okay to write characters that don't fuck. It's okay to write shitty, flawed, human characters who make bad decisions and don't come out the other side always successful and victorious. And even when they're bumbling and amble through things, and they don't have to make a quip about it. One of the things about Real Bebop is that people got shot. They got fucked up and hurt. It's a dangerous world. And in Fake Bebop, Faye gets fucking shot and then just like strolls on over to the restaurant, drinks some beer, and is cool and chilling like she hasn't been fucking shot. Where are the stakes? Where are the consequences when everyone is just there to like get into wacky hijinks and save the day? You can do anything you want to make them seem down on their luck, bumbling, struggling. You know there's no consequences. The heroes are going to win. The villains are going to get their comeuppance. And that was never a guarantee on Real Bebop. In Real Bebop, people get hurt. People get shot. They're poor. They don't know how they're going to eat. They're starving half the time in Real Bebop. But in Fake Bebop, no stakes, no tension, no risk. We never really see them go through hardship where they're eating bell peppers and beef without the beef day in and day out. Everything is falling apart. Ed leaves. Ein leaves. Faye disappears. And Spike and Jet are just sitting around eating a basket of hard-boiled eggs because that's all they have to eat. Where's that? Fake Bebop has all of the atmosphere and trappings in some ways of Real Bebop, but none of the substance that actually makes Bebop so fucking good. Good characters don't have to fuck. They don't have to be funny and relatable to be interesting and compelling. There are so many characters that don't fuck so obviously that I'm going to mention them now because we will never put them on this show. Here's a brief list I compiled literally off the top of my head. Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver, Norman Bates from Psycho, arguably Charles Foster Kane, I'll fucking die on that hill, Walter Schobeck from The Big Lebowski, Daniel Plainview from There Will Be Blood. There are so many good characters who are not good characters and don't fuck, and that's okay. They can be interesting and compelling. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out and watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure that you subscribe and throw me a like. If you didn't, tell me why in the comments. If you agree or disagree or have something to share. If you really, really like this content and want more of it, you can pledge to my Patreon at patreon.com/rain101. It helps me get these videos out on a regular basis. Right now, I am unemployed and between jobs, and so every bit of financial support helps me continue breathing. So that's very, very helpful. If you pledge to the Patreon, you can get early access to videos. You can get early access to the topics we're going to cover. You can even suggest characters for us to cover on the show, get sneak previews, all of that sort of stuff, depending on what level you pledge at. So if you've stuck around this entire time, hey man, why not just pop over there, give it a look. And if you do, I can say with absolute certainty, you are positively 100% someone who fucks. Thank you. So at the end of the video, I forgot to shout out Nick Marsh, aka the Nth Review, one of my patrons at the shout out tier, and just a friend of mine who's a appeared on the stream and promoted my YouTube channel before I even really had any kind of YouTube channel. And so thank you so much, Nick, for your support. And Crash is not on that tier, but I'm going to say thank you to Crash as well, because he's a friend of mine and I like him a lot, and I can do what I want because it's my YouTube channel. Mwah. See you, Space Cowboy.